I was standing in my parents' living room when my mother handed my sister the keys to the house I'd spent years renovating. "You've always been the responsible one," she told her, while my father avoided my eyes. My name had vanished from the will, erased like I'd never been their daughter. I smiled, nodded, and swallowed the burn in my throat. For 34 years, I'd been the dutiful child, the one who paid their bills, fixed their roof, and kept their secrets. But that day, I decided one thing: they would never see me coming, and they wouldn't like it. I moved back to my hometown with a suitcase and a heart full of obligation. My parents had both caught a nasty flu, and the old house, the one that still creaked in the same places I remembered from childhood, needed tending. I thought I was doing the right thing, the thing any decent daughter would do. You've done that too, haven't you? Given up weeks, months, sometimes years of your life just to see your family nod in approval. That's what I believed I was walking into, a chance to prove once again that I was the dependable one. But it took less than a week to feel the imbalance. My sister, Claire, was still the golden child, the one whose smallest achievements were celebrated with champagne. I, on the other hand, was the temporary child, as my uncle once joked at Thanksgiving. Everyone laughed except me. I'd learned to smile along, to swallow the sting, because correcting them only made me sound bitter. My parents didn't deny it. They simply ignored it, as if their silence was neutral ground. One night, while helping my mother fold laundry, she looked at me without lifting her head and said, "Never forget what your sister has done for you." The words hung in the air, heavy and deliberate. I didn't know what she meant. Claire hadn't done anything for me that I could recall. I wanted to ask, but the sharpness in her tone made me hesitate. That's when I felt the first crack in my trust, the first sliver of doubt that maybe I wasn't here just to help them. Maybe I was here for something else entirely, something they weren't saying. The signs were there, but I brushed them aside. At Sunday dinner, my cousin joked again about how I didn't really need an inheritance because I was so independent. Everyone chuckled, including my parents, who never once defended me. It was the same story at every gathering, little jabs masked as humor, each one planting a seed of exclusion. Claire would borrow from my savings just until next payday, and somehow payday never came. When I hinted at repayment, she'd smile like I was being petty. Whenever I asked my father about the property deeds, especially the house I'd poured my savings into renovating, he'd change the subject. He'd talk about the weather or the neighbor's new dog, anything but the papers I wanted to see. My mother would claim she didn't know where the documents were. I told myself it was just forgetfulness, that they were getting older, that I was overthinking. It's funny how the mind works over time to protect the people you love from your own suspicion. Still, there were moments of softness that made me falter. One evening after dinner, I found myself sitting with my father on the back porch. The air smelled of cut grass, and the crickets sang in the dark. Out of nowhere, he told me I'd done a good job fixing the kitchen roof last summer. It was such a small thing, a simple acknowledgement, but it lit something warm in me. I clung to that warmth, even though it was the first compliment I could remember him giving me since I was a teenager. That's the trap, isn't it? One scrap of approval can make you forget 100 cuts. But the warmth didn't last. A few days later, I walked into the study to find Claire kneeling by the family safe. The old brass box was built into the floorboards, its dial worn smooth from years of use. She jumped when she saw me, slamming the lid shut before I could glimpse inside. "What are you doing?" I asked. "Nothing, just putting something away for Mom and Dad," she said, her voice too quick, too bright. She spun the dial with a final twist and stood, blocking my view. It was the look in her eyes that stayed with me. Not guilt, exactly, but possession. As if she were silently telling me, "This isn't yours." It never was. I stood there in the doorway, the hum of the refrigerator in the next room the only sound between us. And for the first time since coming home, I felt the floor tilt beneath me. The living room was packed that afternoon. A strange mix of relatives I hadn't seen in years, and a few faces I barely recognized. The air smelled faintly of coffee and the lemon polish my mother always used on the furniture. We were here for the reading of the will, something I hadn't given much thought to, at least not until my sister took the seat directly beside the lawyer, her hand resting casually on his armrest as if she owned the room. The lawyer cleared his throat and began. His voice was steady, clinical, but the words felt like small detonations. My father's savings, the farmland, the lake cabin, all to Claire. Even the house I had spent thousands renovating was listed under her name. I sat frozen, my mind scrambling for a line that included me, a clause, anything. But there was nothing, not a cent, not a word. When it was over, my mother finally looked at me. Her expression was calm, almost rehearsed. "You'll be fine," she said. "You can take care of yourself. Your sister can't." It wasn't pity, it was dismissal. I could feel eyes on me, waiting for a reaction. My hands itched to slam against the table, to demand answers, but I forced myself to stay still. Rage would only confirm the story they'd always told about me, that I was difficult, ungrateful. Instead, I smiled faintly and nodded. As the room began to disperse, my cousin Mark slipped beside me, his voice barely above a whisper. "I think you should see this." From inside his jacket, he pulled out a folded document. It was a photocopy of an older will, dated 3 years ago. My name was there, clear as day, listed as an equal beneficiary with Claire. I looked up at him, my pulse pounding. "Where did you get this?" He hesitated. "It was in my dad's files. He was one of the witnesses. This isn't right." That night, alone in my room, I spread both versions of the will side by side. The newer one was dated just 5 months ago. Someone had changed it, deliberately, strategically, and if the signatures were real, they'd been obtained quietly, without my knowledge. That was when the first real shift happened inside me. They hadn't just overlooked me. They had erased me. I knew I couldn't confront them now. If I came at them directly, they'd circle the wagons, paint me as the problem. So I decided to play along. Over the next few days, I acted subdued, even grateful for being spared the burden of the estate. I cooked dinners, fixed a leaky faucet, kept my head down. And while they relaxed into thinking I'd accepted my fate, I began to build my case. I started with a notebook, my truth file. Every time I remembered a moment when Claire or my parents had taken from me, I wrote it down. The time Claire sold the old family piano I'd paid to restore. The time my father used my credit to take out a loan for emergencies and never paid it back. I added receipts, old bank statements, screenshots of messages. One evening, after I'd tucked my son into bed, I sat on the edge of his mattress. He was only 9, too young to understand the details, but I wanted him, to know the truth in a way he could carry with him. Sometimes, I told him, people will take what's yours and tell you it's for your own good, but that doesn't make it right. We fight for what's ours, not just for us, but so no one can do it to us again. He nodded sleepily, and I kissed his forehead, the weight of my promise settling deep in my chest. 2 weeks later, while looking through the county's online property records, I stumbled onto something that stopped me cold. There was a small parcel of land, just under 2 acres, registered in my parents' name. It hadn't been mentioned in either will. Its market value wasn't huge, but it was enough to matter. Enough to change the leverage. If they'd left it out intentionally, it meant there were still pieces of the game I didn't know about. And if I could prove they were hiding assets, the entire narrative of their fair distribution would crumble. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the glowing screen, the beginnings of a smile tugging at my lips. This wasn't over. In fact, it was just getting interesting. I began my work in silence. Whenever my mother complained about the clutter in her filing cabinet, I volunteered to help. "Let me go through these for you," I'd say, my voice calm, helpful. She would nod and shuffle off to the kitchen, trusting that I was doing her a favor. I wore thin cotton gloves, just like she'd taught me when handling old photographs, and I scanned every document I touched. Property deeds, loan agreements, utility bills, anything that might prove a timeline. I kept a small flash drive hidden inside a packet of sewing needles in my suitcase. Every night, I'd transfer the scans to my laptop, labeling them with dates and notes. One afternoon, while sorting through a pile of yellowed papers, I found an envelope marked "Legal Personal." Inside was a stack of contracts, including the current will. As I slid the pages out, my father wandered into the room. "Everything in order?" he asked, his tone light, but his eyes fixed on my hands. "Just making sure nothing's missing," I replied, smiling as if the thought of something missing were absurd. He lingered for a moment before walking away. I started carrying a small recorder in my pocket. At dinner, I'd bring up the will casually, watching their reactions. "Funny how it was updated so recently," I'd remark. My mother would say, "It's for the best," while Claire would add, "You agreed it was fair, remember?" The recorder captured every word, including the slip one night when my father admitted, well, we couldn't have left it as it was. The real shock came 3 weeks later. While combing through county court records, I found a mortgage agreement from last year, signed by my father, or so it seemed. But I knew his handwriting. This was close, but not exact. The notary's name was familiar. She lived 3 streets over from Claire. My stomach turned as I compared the signature to others I had scanned. It wasn't my father's, it was Claire's, written in his name. That changed everything. Forgery wasn't just a family betrayal, it was a crime. I dug deeper into their finances. On the same day the will had been updated, there was a withdrawal of nearly $48,000 from the family's joint account. No explanation, no matching deposit anywhere. The date was a perfect match to the notary's stamp on the forged document. That money had gone somewhere, and finding it might be the key to unraveling the whole scheme. I couldn't do this alone. My first ally came from an unexpected place, Uncle Richard. He'd always been quiet at family gatherings, never taking sides. But when I approached him with what I'd found, his face hardened. "They sold my land out from under me 20 years ago," he said. said it was to cover taxes. I never saw a dime. We met twice a week in his garage, spreading documents across the hood of his old truck. He knew the local politics, the back doors my parents might have used. It was Richard who connected me to a lawyer in the next county, someone who specialized in inheritance fraud cases. I met her in a small coffee shop, sliding the flash drive across the table like it was contraband. "This is enough to open an investigation," she said, after scrolling through the files. "But you'll need more. They'll fight tooth and nail." Through her, I learned to request certain records without alerting my parents. I also started reaching out to people from my childhood. One of them, Mrs. Thompson, had lived next door for 30 years. When I told her I was looking into some family property questions, she disappeared into her attic and returned with a dusty manila folder. Inside was the original contract for a small parcel of land, signed and notarized in my parents' names, never recorded as sold. "This was the agreement before they backed out," she explained. "They never told you?" No, they hadn't. And now I had proof. That night, I sat at my desk, the folder open beside me, the glow of the desk lamp spilling over old photographs. In one picture, my mother was holding me as a baby, smiling like the sun was hers to give. In another, Claire and I sat side by side, matching dresses and missing teeth. For a moment, the weight of it all pressed down on me. Not just the theft, but the loss of who I thought they were. I still loved them, in some stubborn corner of my heart. That was the cruelest part. Love didn't erase betrayal, it just made it hurt more. I closed the album and returned to my notes. Affection could wait, justice could not. The night of my father's 60th birthday was a performance in itself. The dining hall was rented out, decked in gold and white, the air thick with the smell of roasted beef and wine. A long table stretched under the chandeliers, lined with relatives, old friends, and people my parents wanted to impress. Claire floated around in a silver dress, smiling like the queen of the evening. My father looked proud. My mother looked smug. I'd been preparing for this moment for weeks. While everyone settled into their seats, I volunteered to run the slideshow of family memories. "It'll be a surprise," I'd told them. They hadn't asked questions, why would they? I was the dependable one, the one who never made a scene. The first few minutes were harmless. Photos from my father's youth, vacations, Christmas mornings. Laughter filled the room. Then, without a pause, I transitioned to a scanned image of the original will, my name highlighted in bold. Gasps fluttered across the table. I let it linger for 5 full seconds before clicking to the updated version, my name erased. "This," I said, my voice steady, "is what it looked like before, and this is what it became 5 months ago." The room fell silent. My mother's fork clinked against her plate. My father shifted in his chair. I moved to the next slide, a close-up of the forged mortgage signature. Side by side with my father's real signature, the difference was obvious. "And this," I continued, "is not my father's handwriting, but it is someone's in this room." My eyes found Claire. She froze, her face draining of color. It was Uncle Richard who broke the silence. "That's forgery," he said flatly. A murmur swept through the guests. Claire stood abruptly, muttering something about not having to listen to lies, and pushed away from the table. She nearly tripped on her dress in her hurry to leave. My mother's hand went to her chest, and she sank into her chair, looking smaller than I'd ever seen her. That image would stay with me, not out of pity, but as proof that the power they wielded over me was finally cracking. My father cleared his throat. "This is all a misunderstanding," he began, but Richard cut him off. "No, it isn't. You did the same to me years ago." Heads turned. Conversations sparked in low, urgent tones. The celebration had shifted into something else entirely, an inquest. Claire reappeared 30 minutes later, with a few relatives in tow, whispering frantically. Soon enough, word spread around the room that I was making this up because I was jealous. My parents didn't correct it. I waited until the whispers reached a peak, then pulled my final card. "Some of you have heard that I'm lying," I said, my voice carrying over the room. "So maybe you should hear it from them." I tapped my phone, and the speakers filled with my parents' voices, clear, unmistakable, discussing how to remove my name from the will and make sure Claire gets everything. The effect was immediate. Faces hardened. A few relatives stood and left without saying goodbye. My father's jaw tightened. My mother wouldn't look at me. Claire slipped out again, this time not returning. Later, when the hall had emptied and the last plates had been cleared, I found my son sitting in the corner, coloring in his notebook. I knelt beside him and wrapped my arms around his small shoulders. He looked up, puzzled at my sudden embrace. "We're almost free," I whispered. "Do you understand?" He nodded slowly, though I knew he didn't grasp the full weight of what had happened. I kissed the top of his head, breathing in the faint scent of crayons and shampoo. For the first time in years, I felt the air shift in my favor. The Monday after my father's birthday, my lawyer filed the paperwork. The allegations were clear: forgery, fraudulent transfer of property, and intentional misrepresentation in an inheritance matter. It was no longer a family squabble, it was a legal case with teeth. The summons hit my parents' mailbox like a hammer. Within days, the mood in the house shifted from smug dismissal to anxious silence. They avoided me entirely, speaking in clipped whispers behind closed doors. Claire, predictably, was nowhere to be seen. When the court date arrived, they walked in flanked by their own attorney, trying to project confidence. I had my lawyer on one side, Uncle Richard on the other. The evidence was laid out in meticulous order: scanned documents, financial records, the notary's statement, and the damning audio recordings. The forged mortgage signature was the nail in the coffin. The notary testified that Claire had brought the document in alone, claiming our father was too ill to sign in person. The timeline matched perfectly with the withdrawal of $48,000 from the joint account. When my lawyer explained how the will had been altered just days after that transaction, the judge's expression tightened. My parents' attorney attempted to argue family misunderstanding, but the paper trail was ironclad. 2 weeks later, the verdict came down. The will was voided, the forged mortgage declared invalid, and my parents were stripped of ownership of the house I'd renovated. The property would be placed back into the estate for proper distribution. I thought that was the end, until my lawyer called me the following morning. "There's something else you need to know," she said. She explained that while tracing the $48,000 withdrawal, her team discovered an account in my name. I'd never opened it. The balance was almost exactly the same as the missing funds. "They were setting you up," she said. "If anyone dug too deep, it would look like you'd stolen the money." The realization hit me like ice water. It wasn't just about taking everything from me. They'd planned to ruin me entirely. My heart pounded, imagining the headlines, the whispers, the shame. I thanked my lawyer for catching it before it was too late. That single discovery turned relief into something sharper, a cold, unshakable clarity about who I was dealing with. The second court hearing was swift. The hidden account was closed, the funds returned to the estate. The judge ordered an independent executor to oversee the redistribution of assets. By the time it was over, my share included the house, part of the farmland, and a settlement payment from my parents for misappropriated funds. The public fallout was brutal. Claire's reputation collapsed overnight. Friends stopped returning her calls. My parents, once pillars of the community, avoided social gatherings. Even relatives who had sided with them kept their distance, unwilling to be pulled into the wreckage. The formal apology came during a family meeting called by the executor. My parents sat stiffly, eyes downcast. "We made mistakes," my father said. My mother added, "We should have been fair." It was not remorse, it was resignation, but in front of the entire extended family, it was enough. The truth was no longer mine alone to carry. Afterward, people approached me quietly, some offering hugs, others just a nod of acknowledgement. Uncle Richard clapped me on the shoulder. "You did what I couldn't," he said. "You stopped them." A week later, the legal dust began to settle. I walked through the house, my house now, and felt an unfamiliar sense of ownership. The walls no longer pressed in on me. The air felt lighter. That evening, after putting my son to bed, I sat at my desk with a blank sheet of paper. I began to write. "Dear Mom and Dad, this is not a letter to reconcile. I am not reaching for you, nor am I asking for anything. I am writing so I can say what has gone unsaid for years. You taught me the value of hard work, but you also taught me what betrayal feels like. You showed me how family can protect, but also destroy. I survived you, and now I will build something better, not in spite of you, but because I refuse to be like you. This is goodbye, for good." I folded the letter, sealed it, and placed it in an envelope. I didn't mail it. I didn't need to. For the first time in my life, the door between us was shut. Not slammed in anger, but closed with finality. I leaned back in my chair, letting the quiet of the house settle around me. It wasn't the warmth of reconciliation I felt. It was the clean, sharp air of freedom. 3 months after the final court decision, I packed the last box from the old house. The walls, once lined with photographs and memories, stood bare. It wasn't sadness I felt, it was relief. My son and I drove away without looking back, the rearview mirror showing only the fading shape of the place where I'd been both raised and betrayed. We settled in a mid-sized city 2 hours away, a place bustling enough to feel alive, but small enough to know your neighbors. I bought a modest, sunlit home with white shutters and a backyard big enough for my son's adventures. The deed was in my name alone, and for the first time, no one could take it from me. The first rule I set in this new life was clear. No contact with my parents or Claire. No holiday calls. No accidental visits. I changed my phone number, updated my email, and blocked them on every channel they could use to reach me. The silence that followed was almost disorienting, but it was the kind of silence you keep after closing a window in the middle of a storm. Necessary and protective. My son adjusted quickly. He made new friends, explored the park down the street, and learned to ride his bike without fear of Claire's mocking laughter or my parents' constant criticism hovering over him. I made sure he understood why we had moved, in terms he could grasp. We protect ourselves, I told him, and we tell the truth, even when it's hard, especially then. In the evenings, I worked on building something for us. The settlement from the lawsuit wasn't a fortune, but it was enough to start a small consulting business. I called it True Line Advisory, specializing in helping people navigate disputes over family property and inheritance. My first clients were friends of friends, people who whispered their stories over coffee, relieved to find someone who understood not just the legal side, but the emotional battlefield they were walking through. Business grew faster than I expected. Every client came with a variation of the same wound, the shock of betrayal by someone they'd loved. I guided them through gathering documents, finding the right attorneys, and, most importantly, building the inner resolve to see it through. Some cried during our sessions, others just sat in stunned silence as the reality settled in. I never judged either reaction. I'd been both. One afternoon, as I was reviewing a case file, an email notification popped up on my screen. The subject line made me pause. Need your help, family fraud. I opened it and froze. It was from my cousin Elaine, a woman I hadn't spoken to in over a decade. Her message was short, almost frantic. I just found out my parents have been transferring property into my brother's name without telling me. They say it's to simplify things, but I think it's to cut me out entirely. I know what happened to you. Please, tell me what to do before it's too late. I sat back in my chair, staring at the words. Here it was, the twist I hadn't expected. My fight, it seemed, had been more than a personal battle. It was part of a pattern, the same silent theft, the same manipulation, repeating itself in another branch of the family tree. For a long moment, I considered the weight of it. Helping Elaine would mean stepping back into a network I'd sworn off. It would mean hearing my family's name in court again, seeing the headlines, maybe even crossing paths with the very people I'd cut off. But it would also mean giving someone else the lifeline I'd wished for when I was drowning. I typed my reply slowly, deliberately. Elaine, I'll help you, but you have to be ready for the truth, and you have to be willing to fight for it. This will change everything. If you're ready, we'll start tomorrow. I hit send and leaned back, exhaling. My son wandered into the room, holding a Lego creation that looked vaguely like a spaceship. Is it done? He asked. What? The fight, he said. I looked at him, his hair messy from play, his eyes clear and unshadowed. I thought of everything we'd been through, the documents, the courtrooms, the nights I'd lain awake, wondering if I was making a mistake, and I realized the truth. No, I said with a small smile. I've won one battle, but the war against silence, that's just beginning. He grinned, not fully understanding, but sensing the importance of my words. I pulled him into a hug, feeling the steady beat of his heart against mine. Outside, the late afternoon sun poured into the backyard, gilding the grass and the fence in warm light. The air smelled like fresh-cut lawn and the faint sweetness of the honeysuckle I'd planted by the porch. For the first time, my future felt wide open, not because I'd left my past behind, but because I'd faced it head-on and lived to tell the story. I stood at the window, watching my son run into the yard with his spaceship. My laptop chimed, a new email, another client referral. The fight, it seemed, was already knocking at my door again. and this time I'd be ready before it even stepped inside. I had my home, I had my business, I had my peace, and I had my rules. The past had taught me that family can be the hand that lifts you up, or the one that pushes you under. But it had also taught me that blood isn't the only bond that matters. The family you choose, the allies you build, the truth you protect, those are the ties worth keeping. And as I turned back to my desk, opening a fresh file for Elaine, I knew one thing for certain. I would keep fighting for her, for my clients, and for every person who'd been told to keep quiet for the sake of family. I'd already shattered my own silence. Now I would help others do the same.